Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to rise today to provide to the members of this Honorable House with an update on my attendance at the International Labor Organization's conference in Geneva last month, as well as the proposed consolidation and modernization of Bermuda's labor legislation, which is long overdue. Mr. Speaker, the International Labor Organization, or ILO for short, brings together governments, employers, and workers of 187 member states to set labor standards, develop policies, and devise programs promoting decent work for all women and men. Mr. Speaker, it is the only tripartite UN agency. The unique tripartite structure of the ILO gives an equal voice to workers, employers, and governments to ensure that the views of the social partners are closely reflected in labor standards and in shaping policies and programs. The main aims of the ILO are to promote rights at work, encourage decent employment opportunities, enhance social protection, and strengthen dialogue on work-related issues. Mr. Speaker, it was a pleasure to attend the 108th session of the International Labor Conference in Geneva in June on behalf of the Government of Bermuda. The International Labor Conference is the ILO's highest decision-making body. It meets annually, bringing together the tripartite delegations from the organization's 187 member states and a number of observers from other international actors to consider a series of topics placed on its agenda by the governing body of the ILO. The conference is composed of a plenary and a number of committees set up to consider the standing items on the conference agenda and technical committees to deal with technical items. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to report that at the conference was the historic adoption of the Violence and Harassment Convention 2019 and Violence and Harassment Recommendations 2019. The new convention and accompanying recommendation to combat violence and harassment in the world of work were overwhelmingly approved by many ILO member states. The convention outlines and reminds member states that they have a responsibility to promote a general environment of zero tolerance or harassment of all kinds. The new international labor standards aim to protect workers and employees regardless of their contractual status. The resolution includes persons in training, interns, and apprentices, workers whose employment has been terminated, volunteers, job seekers, and job applicants. The convention, meanwhile, also recognizes that individuals exercising the authority, duties, or responsibilities of an employer can also be subjected to violence and harassment. The ILO indicated that this is the first new convention agreed by the International Labor Conference since 2011, when the Domestic Workers Convention 2011, number 189, was adopted. The Ministry will keep a watching brief as the ILO develops a comprehensive strategy for the ratification and implementation of the convention. Mr. Speaker, I also wish to provide an update on the consolidation and modernization of the labor legislation. This project has been ongoing for some 5 years, and progressing these changes is both a Progressive Labor Party platform and throne speech initiative. Mr. Speaker, to provide a brief history, the Labor Law Reform Committee, a subcommittee of the Labor Advisory Council, was created in 2014 to review all of the existing labor legislation in Bermuda and to recommend changes that they thought were appropriate. This subcommittee consisted of union representatives, employer representatives, independent representatives, and ex officio members of the Bermuda government. Mr. Speaker, following extensive consultation with key stakeholders, a report was prepared with numerous recommendations on legislative changes. Mr. Speaker, the proposed changes include the consolidation and modernization of most of the labor legislation. However, the intention is for the Employment Act to remain, albeit with amendments. These changes are currently being drafted at the Attorney General's chambers, and it is the government's intent to bring forward the changes before the end of this year for the consideration of this honorable House. Mr. Speakers, the changes will include, and are not limited to, the reduction from 10 arbitration assessor tribunals and 4 acts to a single tribunal for all labor and employment matters. This will reduce the administrative costs and streamline the functions of the tribunals. Provisions for increased maternity leave. Currently, employees who have been employed for 1 continuous year are entitled to 8 weeks paid maternity leave. This will be increased to 13 weeks as promised in our platform and the throne speech. Employees who have been employed for less than 1 continuous year are entitled to 8 weeks unpaid maternity leave. This will likewise be increased to 13 weeks, but again, remain unpaid. Provision for paternity leave. There is currently no provision for paternity leave, and the amendments will allow for 5 days paid paternity leave for employees who have been employed for 1 continuous year per calendar year, and provide for 5 days unpaid paternity leave for employees who have been employed for less than 1 continuous year per calendar year. Provisions for zero tolerance of violence and harassment in the workplace. In keeping with the ILO adoption of the Violence and Harassment Convention, the amendments will also deal with bullying, harassment, and in particular sexual harassment in the workplace. Employers will be required to have in place a zero tolerance policy for harassment in the workplace and recourse for employees for any contravention of the policy. Mr. Speaker, as some of the labor laws were prepared and drafted more than 30 years ago, and in one instance more than 50 years ago, Bermuda can look forward to legislation that is fit for purpose in the 21st century with streamlined and simplified processes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.